Hello folks, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, welcome. In today's video I want to cover a topic which is probably relevant if you're looking at buying a van, or if you're currently doing your van into a camper, or if you're just curious about this, it might be worth of knowing. And that is what it's like to live in a van in extreme cold and hot weather conditions. So to give you an idea, I've been living in this van for just over 3 months, with an equal amount of time spent in extreme cold and extreme hot. I don't mean Antarctica and Mojave Desert or something like that, but it is pretty cold during April period in Austria, for example, where I was traveling through at that time. And also it is pretty hot during the summer months in Montenegro and Croatia, where I've been most recently. So we're talking something like minus 20 degrees Celsius or thereabouts, and maybe about 35 up to 35 degrees Celsius in the Balkans during the summer. Now I've decided to head inside because it is quite windy today and I don't want the audio quality to go. So on the topic of cold weather conditions first. So the van gets quite cold during cold weather. It doesn't matter how much insulation you have, really. I've noticed I've got quite a decent amount of insulation in the van. It does get quite cold, and it does retain some heat if you heat the van up through different means. But as soon as you, for example, open the doors because you want to get out and do something outside, or in general, the heat escapes quite quickly. The other thing is, again, doesn't matter how much insulation you have on the floor gets quite cold. And I believe that's because obviously between the chassis and the ground, there is a gap, given that the wheels are there, of cold air if you're in a cold climate. And no matter how much insulation you're going to have on the floor, that's just going to exist, and it is going to make the floor a lot cooler. On the flip side, in hot weather conditions, that can be a benefit because it means the floor doesn't heat up as much as the roof, for example. And the other thing I notice myself, at least in cold weather conditions, I'm not a fan of cold weather. I am quite demotivated, and every time I want to do something that requires me to get outside, I don't really want to do it. And that means you do get confined to a fairly small space during cold weather conditions, because you don't necessarily want to go out to do meditations or stretches or that sort of thing. That can be a bit demotivating and a stress factor for some people, so do bear that in mind as well. Now, on the topic of hot weather conditions, on the flip side, yeah, it's amazing. I love being in hot weather. I love having the sun around me all the time. But the problem is, especially with my van, which is made of metal, that it heats up quite a lot. And I suppose because of the insulation as well, it's supposed to act in two ways. It retains heat, but also is supposed to reflect heat. It seems like the heat, once the van heats up, it stays in the van. And believe me, it feels like a sauna. As soon as you get in, after literally not long, sometimes it could just be half an hour of being under direct sunlight, you sweat a lot. And it's difficult to be in this space, especially if you need to be. Let's say if you're going to be working remotely in your van or that sort of thing, it can be quite a difficult thing to be doing during that time. So either way, you're not going to win whether it's extreme cold or extreme hot conditions. But there are a few things you can definitely do in relation to, firstly, considering what kind of a van you buy, and secondly, what kind of things you do to your van if you're currently building it, or just in general lifestyle. Two other worthy mentions about the hot weather condition as well is that it can be sometimes quite difficult to sleep if your van's been heating up all day and you don't have any means of ventilation, or even if you do and you're still in a hot climate and during the night it might still be quite hot, it can be difficult to sleep. And the other thing is, at least with my fridge, it doesn't seem to work as good as it does when the van hasn't heated up fully. So just bear that in mind. Maybe bear it in mind when you're purchasing fridges. Do your research. Buy a fridge that is actually really good and keeps the cold quite well, even when your van isn't room temperature, but it's actually quite hot. All right, so the number one thing to consider is the type of the van that you are buying. Now, there are many different makes and models. I don't necessarily mean that. You can also look into buying a panel van like mine is, or a Luton van, or any other kinds of vans. That doesn't matter necessarily. What matters is the material that the van is made of. Mine is made of metal, so it means that during the cold it gets quite cold, and during the heat it gets quite hot, because metal is a good conductor of heat. You can also buy vans which are made of, I suppose, fiberglass or some kind of plasticky material. Now, I've got some experience because, like I said, mine is made of metal, and my friend has a Luton van which is made of some kind of fiberglass or plastic, and it seems like the metal vans do get really, really hot. In terms of cold weather conditions, I don't think it makes that much of a difference, maybe a little bit, but when it comes to heat, it is a considerable difference. The second thing is you can consider whether to leave your cabin area opened or closed off, and I'll show you what I mean exactly by that. So this is my cabin area, and it is open, right? Well, slightly open because I've got this little wall here that I made. But in general, the vans come with this area closed off by a metal sort of wall. I've decided to open this up because it does allow you a lot more space. It allows you to put swivels on your seats and to use that space as a sort of living area as well. And of course, there are other benefits. Easy to get into the cab area if you need to in an emergency, or if you want to get stuff from there, or if you want to use the side doors instead of using the sort of big side door, but actually the cabin doors is what I mean, to get in and out, then that is a benefit. The bad thing about this when it comes to this weather condition situation is that because it is an open area, it doesn't retain the heat so well during the cold weather conditions, because you've got single glazed windows in the cab. There you go, these ones, which means the heat escapes quite easily through that. Now, the way around that is to put some kind of thermal blinds or curtains. Mine supposedly are. And it does make a difference, to be fair. But the other drawback is when it comes to hot weather conditions. And that is because that glass, that windshield, is literally like a magnifying glass, and your dashboard is probably black. It heats up like crazy, and typically it doesn't have good ventilation unless you open your windows in the side doors, but obviously security reasons you might not want to keep those open during when you are away from the van. So because of that, all this heat that comes in from the cabin gets into your van as well. I don't know if it would make a difference. Maybe if it was closed off, maybe it would be even worse, because that heat would just stay in that cabin area. So if you were to get into that and drive off, you might be like, okay, I need to wait, I need to have a draft going through. I don't know, but it's worth considering this thing when you're making your van. Now, the next thing is whether you're going to be putting in windows or not in the body of your van. Obviously, the van comes with the cab area, it has windows in there already, but you can choose to add extra windows around your van. Now, plus and minus of those is, well, first of all, whether you put in a glass window or an acrylic window, because you've got a choice of that. I decided to put glass windows in, and spoiler alert, I think I would have gone for acrylic windows instead. And the reason is that the acrylic windows typically are double glazed, so obviously that's better for cold weather conditions. And secondly, because they're acrylic, they don't heat up as much as glass does during blasting sun. Now, the windows look like this. Don't mind the unfinished look. And I've got small ones just around the mess of the bed on both sides of the bed like this. Now, of course, it's a double-edged sword. Like I said, when it comes to the cold or the hot, it definitely conducts both the heat and the cold a lot easier than if you just had insulation there. On the flip side, if you get windows which can open, which I recommend you do, don't get windows that don't open, you obviously have the possibility of getting the draft in, right? So that's something to consider. A little thing about windows as well, you probably will want to get window covers, and ideally window covers that are thermal and window covers that are reflecting. So the thermal will mean that the heat stays in the van when you're heating your van up, and the reflecting ones will reflect the sunlight a lot more, and that means the van is not going to heat up as much. I don't really have any. I only have window covers that just allow me to have privacy, but I am about to get some reflecting window covers. Believe me, I've lived in this for 3 months now. Get some. It can be an expense, or you can make them cheaper if you want, but it's absolutely worth it. The next thing is insulation. To be honest, it's an easy one for me. I would still do the insulation, but if you're going to be living in hot weather conditions, perhaps you might not want to do that. I'll suggest you do some research around it, but tread this topic lightly because there are a lot of insulation gurus out in this van build space. But I have seen a lot of vans, especially in places like Australia, that don't even have insulation. So maybe it is worth considering. Learn from people's experience as opposed to their knowledge from lack of experience. And maybe it's worth not putting insulation in if you're going to be in hot countries. I personally have 50mm PIR boards on the sides of the van, obviously where I could put them, like I couldn't put them on the windows. And then on the ceiling and the floor I have got 25, I believe, or maybe the ceiling is also 50. And then around places that it's not easy to put PIR boards, I've put this kind of recycled plastic wool sort of material. And it is considerably better having insulation in cold weather conditions than it is not having it. And I've experienced it without the insulation because I went to Wales for a trip with my friend and my dad before, and it was fucking cold. Really freezing without insulation. That was before I've done the van and I only had the bed and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I definitely recommend doing insulation. Next is ventilation and heating. So in terms of ventilation, how are you going to keep this place cool during hot weather? So obviously one thing is having windows that you can open. Another thing you can do is to have a fan, which I'll show you. So this is my Max Air Roof fan, and it allows me to have air intake or air outtake, and to obviously set the speed of the fan, and there's a thermostat and all this kind of stuff. To me, it is an absolute essential. I wouldn't go without it, but I've experienced some problems, and I don't know if it's because I've been running it so much during the hot weather, or it got heated up, or it's just a faulty model, but it seems to sometimes go into a crazy mode where it starts to beep and I have to kind of reset it. So just bear that in mind. It might not be the best at all times. The other thing, of course, you can do for ventilation is to actually have vents, which I've seen a lot of people do. I don't have any. And the last thing I would say you can do about this as well is to have sort of desk fans or normal household fans. I've got this little bad boy here. It's honestly not too bad. I've paid about £6 for it. It plugs into the lighter, cigarette lighter slot, and it runs pretty well. But regardless, it is no substitute for air conditioning, and unfortunately my van doesn't have it. If you buy a newer model of vans, yours is probably going to come with it, but it is a considerable extra expense to get a van with air conditioning. There are supposedly some models of air conditioning units you can get and either fit them into the van or to have them as a sort of standalone version. I would probably steer away from that. I don't know what I was thinking, but I bought this one in Lidl for £35, and I'm going to give them a shout out. It's called Silvercrest, and it's pretty crap. It doesn't work. £35 or euros rather, spent, wasted. It's literally a direct current fan with this little water tank and a little thing that you put into the water tank that's supposedly meant to give you air conditioning, but it doesn't, of course, because it's a piece of crap. The reason why I give them a shout out, bad shout out, is because I went to Lidl again to get it returned because it doesn't work. In the UK I would have no problem. I've done it plenty of times when things don't work. Unfortunately in Italy, the lady told me that I need to go to the same store, but well, the problem is I've already driven for 4 hours since that store. So yeah, here is your little tip. Now, when it comes to heating, of course, the number one source of heating is the diesel heater, the most common one. I have one. It's pretty cheap. I think I paid about £115 or so. You can get it on eBay. These are usually the Chinese makes. I've read that the Chinese makes of heaters are actually good because the original diesel heater maker ran out of the patent, or the patent rather expired, and the Chinese makers could start to produce them exactly the same without any issues. And they are very reliable and very efficient with fuel as well. You don't really use a lot of diesel to heat the space up. And the good thing is it's instant and quite easy to fit as well. It runs on diesel, so diesel is quite easily accessible. Usually comes with a 5-litre tank. Sometimes it might come with a 10-litre, or you can actually just get a bigger tank if you wish to. You can also tap into your main diesel tank, but obviously you want to research that to do it properly, and just bear in mind that you don't run your fuel tank dry. The other option is to fit a wood burner, which my friend actually has, and I must say that it's amazing to have a real fire in the van, and 2, it gets extremely hot, which is amazing because you can heat the space up really well, and you use wood. Wood is quite easily available in shops, as well as easily scavengeable, if that is even a word. In forests, you can find sticks that are lying around and just use that to burn in the wood burner. The last thing to consider is slightly different, and that is your lifestyle. If you don't necessarily need to work from the van or do things from the van, and you can spend time outside, and this is more relevant for hot weather conditions, then you're pretty much set. You can do whatever you're doing. You can be outside for most of the day, not stay inside of the van, not feel like you're in a sauna constantly. But if you are going to be working from the van, then you might want to consider getting a workspace where you can work from, or doing so in cafes or any places that may have air conditioning, because it can become quite difficult to be dealing with that heat. When it comes to cold weather conditions, there is not really much you can do, aside from perhaps if you are into exercise, stretching, this sort of stuff, maybe you want to get a gym membership wherever you are. Obviously these things are a little bit more difficult if you're traveling around as opposed to staying in one place for a bit, but worth considering about your lifestyle as well. If you have enjoyed the video, then please leave a thumbs up, and I would appreciate a subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and a comment down below if you've got any suggestions for any other topics to cover, or your experience in terms of living in a van, or questions around the van builds. And for the time being, I'm going to go for a run. All right, folks, peace and love, and I'll see you in the next video.